So before we introduce this lovely panel, just with a show of hands, how many people think that blockchain is hope in terms of expanding economic opportunities? Wow. How many people think it's hype? All right. I'm with you, David. So I might have to be the contrarian in the room and for the purpose of this panel. So why don't we begin with Yinka?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Yinka David West from Lagos Business School in Nigeria, and I'm a professor of information systems. Well, I believe it's hope, so otherwise we won't be here, right? Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marco Dell'Erba. I'm a law professor at the University of Zurich and a fellow at the New York University School of Law. But here I represent the Wilson Center, where I am a global fellow. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Noonan. I'm representing an organization called the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, or AFI for short. And our community are financial regulators and central bankers from across the global south who have added the mission of financial inclusion into their mandates. And as for my personal choice, I'll go for hope as well, as I'd like to think of myself as a glass half full person.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arunjay Katakam. I work with the United Nations Capital Development Fund. We specifically in migration and remittances, where we're trying to help least developed countries with their policy and market infrastructure. I am an optimist, but I do believe if we, hype is the word I'd go with. So back to you.
All right, perfect. So we have a balanced panel. Why don't we start with you, Arunjay, and really talk about what type of economic opportunities can blockchain provide to the economically disadvantaged?
Yeah, so blockchain is a technology like any other. And I think what it does is it opens opportunities to go against the incumbents. But fundamentally, we need to look at our economic system, which is very extractive. Inequality is only increasing and vastly, and everyone here knows that. And then we've got a situation where it's a winners take all model. So, unicorns, decacorns, whatever next. So if we look at the gig economy, that's one that really worries me, because I'll give you a tangible example with Uber. What we have is, Uber over the last decade, created something really phenomenal. At its height, it was worth $100 billion, 3 to 4 million taxi drivers, lots of jobs. But it started with a model which took 20, 25%, and it provided a lot of incentives. And then it changed. Slowly, it evolved. And today, they take up to 50% of the ride. They don't even tell the taxi driver how much they're charging. They just offer the driver a certain price. And none of these 3, 4 million drivers got any of the shares. So all that 100 billion, all of that goes to a very small minority of people. And so, that's Uber, but I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of gig economy companies all following the same model. Today, 30 to 40% of workforce is in the gig economy. And my problem is really more with the physical gig economy, because that's where the extraction is highest. In the digital side, there's a lot more improvements, but on the physical side, it's a really big problem.
Thanks. Robin, what are you seeing in the global space with respect to financial inclusion and other issues that you're looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I think, firstly, I'd like to start answering that by just looking at the role that digital innovation and digital finance in particular has played in the last couple of years in helping mitigate the impacts of this COVID-19 pandemic, this sort of strange period of human history that we've all been living through. And I think digital finance overall has really proven its worth in this period. It's enabled governments to deliver targeted fiscal support to the most vulnerable populations. Remote onboarding to accounts, to e-wallets has really become the norm, and it's become accepted as the norm even by global standard setters, such as the Financial Action Task Force. We've seen digital payments, as a result, surge in many countries, especially developing countries all around the world. And the evidence is, on the positive side, that that is sustaining even beyond the pandemic. So there are a lot of gains that have been made. But on the flip side of that, if we look at every other metric, if we look at poverty reduction, if we look at inequality, even climate action, we've gone backwards on all of those things. So the question is then financial inclusion for what? What are we going to use this enhanced digital access for, and how can it tackle some of the most urgent issues? So we're very interested in looking at issues like helping communities adapt to the impact of climate change. How can digital finance actually help, smallholder farmers who are encountering ever-increasing risk of crop destruction? How can we provide insurance at scale to such communities? We're also interested in looking at global health, and how can digital finance help extend universal health coverage so that having an adverse health diagnosis doesn't mean falling into poverty and economic catastrophe for your family. So I think those are some of the next set of issues beyond just access that we need to be now looking at, and I hope that blockchain can be part of the solutions to those set of challenges.
So it might be useful to take a look at a specific country to see how digital innovations could potentially solve problems. Yinka, can you kind of speak to what's happening in Nigeria, and maybe also talk about its CBDC project?
Okay, great, thanks. Nigeria is one of Africa's most populous nations, and I think our digital revolution started when the telecoms infrastructure was liberalized. And when we saw that basically gradually people were adopting mobile telephony, the other services like financial services latched on and sort of started providing phygital services. But one thing that Nigeria has evolved in is mainly the fintech revolution, where we have a growing number of fintechs that are raising good capital and unicorns growing. And while they're providing different banking experiences, the reaching the last mile and the bottom of the pyramid is still not quite there yet. Another good thing that Nigeria has is the issue of fast payments. So we have an instant and inclusive payment system that basically transfers money between bank accounts instantaneously, which is useful especially when you have people who don't want digital channels but just want to use their bank accounts and continue using accounts. And then another area is the issue about reaching the last mile is also a phygital strategy, because we can't eliminate agents, right? These third-party agents are the ones who stay in rural areas to serve those communities that don't want to be digital or don't even have access to the devices. So it's a mix of different technologies, but one thing we're seeing is that COVID did help in terms of replacing cash, because without physical cash exchanges, we had to go digital. And the best way is really from bank account to bank account before you go to the channel levels and things like that. So those are the basic things going on. And then in October 2021, our central bank launched the first African central bank digital currency called the e-Naira. And that has been an interesting experience. I wouldn't say it's been an interesting experience. I'll leave it at that. And bottom line is, I think before a central bank, my conclusion is before a central bank can implement a digital currency like a central bank digital currency, you need some fundamental drivers or enablers like government trust. And without that government trust, basically people would still prefer their cash. So people don't want the government monitoring their activities or their movements and things like that. So those things still need to be ironed out. And then another thing that's also required is a lot of digital literacy and financial literacy, because people don't really understand, okay, what if in terms of consumer protection, who owns the money? Yes, it's a central bank currency, but we've seen banks go down and people lose their shirts and things. So there's still a lot of lack of communication and awareness building that needs to go on. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yinka, out of curiosity, do you own any e-Naira?
I do. I'm doing some work on it, so I had to sort of engage and do it. So when I was doing a study on it, actually, one of the things we did was we had a small token to pay some of the respondents in the focus group sessions. So one of the ways that we did that was actually paying them with e-Naira, but that was people's first experience. So it's something that it will grow on eventually. And sorry, one of the other areas that the central bank has assigned or implemented recently is the use of USSD codes, because prior to that we could only use it through a smartphone app. And again, so data is expensive. People don't have smartphones. So how do you make it more accessible to the general body of Nigerians? Thank you.
Thanks. So we've had a country look, and it would be interesting to take a sectorial perspective. Marco, can you speak a bit about what's happening in the capital markets?
Well, yeah, this is a very broad question. I would need 2 hours to answer to this question. But looking at capital markets from the perspective of small, medium enterprises, I could say that short-term funding for small, medium enterprises has always been the main issue, and banks are basically incapable to lend money to small, medium enterprises because there's a lot of pressure to borrow money to companies that don't have a rating or have a very low rating. And ICOs at the beginning were very promising because they were a revolutionary tool for capital formation, but in the end, a lot of scams, the lack of secondary market, the impossibility to engage institutional investors made all the promises related to ICOs breached. Some hope, to answer to the question, maybe comes from the tokenization of real assets, especially equity and debt. Tokenizing real assets means involving market infrastructures, means involving institutional investors, and in one word, enhance liquidity and transparency for the market related to SMEs. And the very last point of the disruption then is DeFi as the future. And COVID, as you said, really was a catalyst for developing a broader range of services for SMEs to get access to credit. And I think that we will assist to the development of new loans and financial instruments that could bring integration of SMEs to the next level. But the most important thing is really to foster an environment where there's trust, transparency, and involvement of appropriate market venues where there's fairness and, again, transparency.
So we've spent billions of dollars a number of years working on things like financial inclusion, international development, and it's not clear if we've actually gotten much for the amount of money that we've spent. So in 2020 or 2021, for example, I think the global community spent something like $180 billion on aid. And there's about 700 million folks who earn less than $1.90 per day. If we actually divided that 180 billion, that would probably be around $250 for everyone who earned less than $190 a day. So I'm raising the statistic because I want to highlight that, are there easier ways to solve some of the problems that you all identified versus focusing on new technologies? So, to the panelists, I'm curious as to what lessons have we learned from applying digital innovation so far in expanding economic opportunities. Let me start with Yinka.
Okay. I think digital innovations won't take you to the promised land, and I think that's the reality. There are other things that one needs to do to get to the promised land. So what are those things we need to do? First of all, we need to build the social structures and the systems. We need to ensure that the infrastructure can actually get to the last mile. There's some parts of Nigeria, we've had global telecoms for about 20 years now, but there's still some locations that are not economically viable. Arunje talked about the gig economy. How do we bring more people working? Because economic inclusion is the prerequisite to financial inclusion. So there's so many things that, and all these things are integrated across different government systems. So also with institutional voids working, you find out that we're spending, doing so much, but repeating without really growing the pie. So how do we work together collaboratively? One of the schools of thought that we had was, so for example, in Nigeria, financial inclusion is run by the central bank. But then there's so many overarching and different pieces that we need to manage. Why don't we make it a national imperative that's run maybe by the presidency or somebody else that can aggregate all the government institutions together to work together? So whether it's for social investment programs and cash transfers, whether it's for healthcare systems, education, so we build the financial layer and then build the stacks on top of it. Otherwise, we're going to continually trying to rebuild everything and we won't get to the critical mass. So it's more work than just bringing in the technology. Thank you.
Marco, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I was thinking about what you're saying. The problem is that the state has to delegate the innovation process because it doesn't have the tools and the money for doing that. And that's the reason why, for example, we developed stable coins that are a consequence of the framework that was in place before, with central banks delegating innovation for payment systems to the private sector. So I agree with you that the central bank and the government should take the lead, and this is important, but it should really take the lead to act as a catalyst, because it's important to foster innovation, and on the basis of what we experienced in history, governments and central banks don't often have the same interest in developing and achieving the same level of technological integration and technological innovation. And if this can be also a corollary to what you were saying, looking at the experience of El Salvador implementing a system relying on Bitcoin, we should be very careful about using technology and designing technology for achieving political, economic independence on one hand, and on the other hand, financial inclusion, because it could simply be a huge fail. And on the other hand, I think that the idea of DeFi as a leapfrog technology could be helpful in the sense of really expanding the audience of those who can get access to finance, bypassing all the mechanisms of traditional finance, all the traditional payment systems, traditional fiat currencies, and so on. And again, history shows that with mobile phones, this is what happened with a lot of people bypassing traditional telecommunication systems and adopting mobile phones. And what is interesting is that if you look at the data issued by the World Economic Forum, from the 1.7 billion of unbanked people, 1.1 has access to cell phones, which is already a great layer for then building a stronger financial integration and achieving higher levels of financial inclusion. I'll stop here.
Can I just add something to Marco? Marco, in Nigeria, they will tell you digital innovations don't solve hunger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. But
So Marco, let me just be a little bit of a contrarian here. DeFi is not really decentralized. At the end of the day, you're still going to have centralized entities providing that service, right?
Yeah. DeFi is not decentralized. Technology is not decentralized. And this is a major issue. But decentralization also comes with some risks. And it would be very utopistic and probably naive to think that a full decentralization of any system becomes the solution. Think about crypto exchanges. Decentralized exchanges don't bring transparency, fairness in the market. We have no certainty about their ability to resist and to be stable in the financial system. And the financial system needs stability to prosper and to bring more people. So this utopia of the full decentralization should be probably a little bit recalibrated to make sure that there are appropriate gatekeepers taking care and control of the market mechanisms and minimizing scams, and on the other hand, systemic risk. I don't want to be too technical, but you all imagine what systemic risk is. So,
Robin, your thoughts on lessons learned so far in terms of financial inclusion and blockchain?
So I would agree with your point, Paul, that aid without real country ownership is very soon going to run into challenges of scale and sustainability. But for us, an area that offers a very good return for investment is the implementation of smart policies. And I think we do need smart policies here that align with the technological innovation and allow it to flourish and to reach scale over time. I think if you look at the past, you can see examples where that has happened. I mean, taking the example of M-Pesa in Kenya, actually you've had quite a modest investment in the beginning, but that coupled with private sector innovation and enabling regulation from the central bank, beginning with a letter of no objection and issued right at the outset, over time that's flourished to be almost a complete digital finance ecosystem where you can access credit, savings, buy securities, even treasury bonds through that mobile money infrastructure. So there are definitely lessons to be learned from such cases around the importance of enabling regulation. I think we can look also at India, just how important investing in digital public infrastructure is. With the development of the India Stack model, you have digital ID, you have interoperable payments through universal payment interface, and also the start of an open finance model with customer consent mechanism there. So these kind of very strategic, intentional investments on the public sector side, I think, can really pay off over time. And we need to find better ways, I think, for the technological innovation from the private sector and the policy innovation from the public sector to really interface with each other well. I'm not sure that is quite happening yet in the blockchain space, but hopefully we can get there over time.
So Robin, a question for you is, how applicable are some of these lessons for other countries? So M-Pesa, for example, is always held up as a model for peer-to-peer payments or mobile payments, but it actually hasn't been replicated anywhere else. And same with India. How replicatable are those solutions to other countries?
Yeah. I would say actually it's starting to be replicated. I think you can see a lot of models now across Africa, perhaps not so much in Nigeria, but in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, you are starting to see mobile money models flourish. South Asia as well, Latin American markets like Paraguay. So I think replication is possible. I think from the India case, yes, maybe other countries will not have the same amount of sort of firepower in terms of investment, but I think we're seeing digital ID infrastructure being recognized as critical, and many countries are sort of taking that as a priority for their inclusive fintech strategies. So I think there's a lot we can learn about enabling regulation, about models of public-private collaboration that work, and about the importance of setting an intentional strategy and clear goals at the end of the process.
So Runjay, the same question with a slightly different twist. So what are we doing wrong, and why aren't we making more progress?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what Robin said, except M-Pesa today is a very extractive model. Mm-hmm. So for all its success, it costs 2 to 3% to move money domestically, whereas in a developed country, it's almost free or literally free. So you can see the problem, right? So they made all this progress. So technology has enabled us to provide access, but access alone is not enough. And so in the last decade, access has increased tremendously, but financial health has decreased in the same time. So there's a lot that needs to be done to further improve the situation. At the start of the pandemic, I realized that while the entire industry had added over 500 million people to bank accounts, those bank accounts were empty. And there was nothing to fall back on. And this is the problem of the economic system, which is so extractive. Like I said earlier, the examples of Uber and other gig workers, but even if you're a farmer, and it's all sectors of society. And if we don't build that resilience and don't improve financial health, then all of this is not doing very much.
So this is a great segue into sort of the next segment of our talk, which is where can we make the biggest impact? Let's start with Robin. Where can we make the greatest impact in applying digital innovations for expanding economic opportunities?
Two areas that I think really need a lot of focus. One, I think was mentioned by Yinka, is digital financial literacy. I think we really have to scale up efforts there through public-private collaboration, because the product is only going to be as good at the end of the day as the end user's capacity to engage with it and use it confidently and securely. And we know that that is challenging in rural communities, for people with disabilities, for tribes using native languages and so forth. So if we really want that last mile access, the digital financial literacy efforts are going to be very, very critical. But the other one, I think specifically in the digital asset space, is regulation. I think it's very clear that the future is not going to be prohibition. We've seen a few countries try that, not very successfully. But equally, the future is not going to be existing in the shadows either. So we need to go down that regulation path. But I think we're quite a long way still from defining what good regulation looks like in this space and having any kind of globally coordinated approach to that. And if the sector is really going to flourish and play a key role in financial inclusion strategies going forward, I think that is something that needs a lot of focus to really define what good regulation looks like here.
Marco?
Can I just follow up on what, in my opinion, is good regulation? Good regulation is in this area, is a regulation that does not react on an ex post basis, no matter what happens in the markets. It's a regulation that tries to anticipate, in a way, some of the events and create some small bubbles, such as regulatory sandboxes and financial innovation hubs, for helping entrepreneurs to develop their innovative projects without running the risk to go to jail, in one word. On the other hand, the very strong boundary is legal certainty. And legal certainty is a tool not only for finance, but for the society to prosper. And if I can say what I think is really important to be developed, which completes our previous discourse also, is really to rely on a fully integrated platform of stable coins plus central bank digital currencies. I truly believe that a strong payment system is the way for fostering integration, fostering trust in the technology, and make the technology flourish beyond this perimeter, this very technical perimeter. But payment system is what really helps us and serves as a tool for making any kind of economic activity. And I think that regulators and central bankers should find a way to balance a system where stable coins and central bank digital currencies coexist. Because if I can say just one more sentence, we have to remember that decentralized finance is built on as an independent system where central bank digital currencies are not required. So what should central bankers do? Should they just say, okay, I don't want to do anything because you guys are full independent? I don't think so, because a system needs to rely on a strong central banking system. So these are, in my opinion, the two priorities.
That's perfect.
Thank you.
So let me just add that while Stellar cannot provide sort of a legal certainty of finality, it can provide technical finality, which is one of the unique benefits of Stellar. Arunjay? Same question.
Yeah, Paul. I think we need to look inwards. You know, we need to change. The change has to happen from inside us. And when we look at it from inside out, that's the catalyst. This idea that we can help others and make millions doing it is deeply flawed. And that's what we see startup after startup, all trying to do, become unicorns, but also help. Like, so I see these two things that's not compatible. And I've seen through working with a lot of startups and venture building, this mission drift. So you start with, okay, I'm going to help the poor, I'm going to do inclusive finance, but then you get your first round of funding, and then you need, the only way to continue that funding model is to somehow show a path to unicorn status. And you very quickly forget about those people who you really wanted to, you start off wanting to help because the model doesn't work. So we need a new model, and we need to build solutions that are less extractive and that could really, truly, economically empower the disadvantaged people.
Yinka, I see a lot of nodding.
Yes. And I think I'm going to go and side with Arunji on this one, because my answer was going to be service or product or service innovation, primarily because the problems that we have and the challenges we're trying to solve are unique to us. So it has to come from that perspective. When Robin mentioned M-Pesa's success, yes, M-Pesa has been successful, but it came out of a need. It wasn't the mobile money technology or the platform that was successful. It was the send money home that was successful, and that really drove the use of M-Pesa. So every country has to build its own use case of what is relevant to that country, and then use the appropriate digital innovations to drive and enable that. But without that, we can't really, we're just going to be throwing technology around the place without really a bait in that sense. So for me, I think it's really, how do we enable private sector digital innovation, again, without the pressure of scale and numbers and private sector funding, etc. Because that's also one of the problems where a lot of the venture capital funding doesn't really understand African problems. So what they're looking at is funding problems that they understand and problems that they can internationalize. Then it might just be a small local problem within that. But Arunje's point on safety nets and financial health is critical, because there's no point in giving a man a fish today when he doesn't know how to fish. Otherwise, it's going to be a recursive cycle, and that's just what we're seeing currently. So that's why I started out with economic inclusion is critical. We need to empower people and enable people to do what they need to do. Technology can help, but technology can only go so far. There needs to be other social systems that need to complement the technology and ensure that we can hit a home run. Thank you.
Perfect. So we have a few minutes left. Any questions from the audience before I ask my own questions? Karen.
This panel. So you guys talked about, you guys talked about the importance of access and transparency in terms of financial inclusion, and it seems like the last pillar is trust. And I hear a lot of conversations around what I consider to be traditional finance. So, financial companies, financial services, fintech companies that are bootstrapped by VCs, for example, or the partnership between private and public. So now we're kind of announcing at Stellar, right, this Sorbonne kind of open runtime environment for just kind of natural innovation to happen, where you can create your own DeFi app. So that's really on the right-hand distribution curve in terms of I think, lack of regulation. So I was kind of curious what the panelists thought. You know, naturally, are there kind of like DeFi apps that you've seen in the wild on other blockchains that could be useful, kind of in spite of the conversation around how early we are in the fintech space when it comes to inclusion? So, meaning, is there something that, you know, could naturally happen in DeFi that would be of benefit in terms of financial inclusion from your perspective?
Hope. Yes, a lot.
Yeah.
I'll let her.
No,
No, that's all I want. Basically, I think there's a lot that can happen, but it's really how do you make it happen? And how do you drive it within the context of the environment in which you want to drive it in?
For me, what is preoccupying about blockchain and DeFi more generally is that there was no strong development of best practices, something that was a layer for the private sector to strongly interact with the policy, with policymakers. And the next step would be really to foster the development of these best practices. And from this perspective, it would be important to have some prominent actors who are reliable and have some sort of credibility and reputation to make this happen. And then starting from best practices, you really start developing a common understanding of the problems and the importance also to define the problems in the same way in an arena that is very much heterogeneous compared to traditional finance.
Any other thoughts? You know, for me, what I've seen in international development is we go through cycles. You know, there's an agricultural revolution, there is a microfinance revolution, there is an infrastructure revolution, and then we go back to agriculture, microfinance, and infrastructure, right? So every few years, we go through these cycles. And, you know, from my perspective, I'm hoping that DeFi is the next microfinance revolution, right? So how can we think about Green Bank 3.0? And this is the exciting part, I think, about Surban and blockchain in general, is that it has the potential to be that next revolution in international development, particularly in microfinance. So we have 3 minutes left.
It was a very exciting interview. I want to ask, what's the difference, because we are talking about CBDCs and the government wanted to take every time control everybody. How we can make it independent, that like in countries like in Africa, because they're very, very poor countries. What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, no, I think this CBDCs is something that you know, very much, I don't know, in the next decade it's likely to happen, and there's some very big problems with it, although it comes with a lot of potential. So when you talk about government control, so the programmability of money, if today, you know, you give a direct transfer, you know, there's still this choice that each person has on how they want to spend it. But once you start programming this money and say you can only buy X with it or Y with it, or, you know, if you vote for me, I'll give you this money, you know, then you really start to, you know, take away that agency of choice, the democracy. So that's the big risk on that side. But on the other side, it does have a lot of benefits on the technology side. So we have to be very, very careful on how this gets designed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the reason that African policymakers have been amongst the first actually to sort of jump in at the deep end on CBDC, I think, is because of the financial inclusion motivation. And they look at the state of digital finance penetration today, and despite progress, there are a lot of challenges still there. So they need to be open-minded towards any potential solutions that can help progress to the last mile. Now, whether it whether that CBDC is controlling or empowering, I think that is to do with design choices in the process. So I think there's still a lot up to play for in terms of how those CBDCs actually get designed, tested, and roll out. And I think there is potential for them to be designed in such a way that they can be empowering, even more empowering for the user today compared to their current traditional finance options. But we'll see how that plays out, I'm sure, in the next couple of years.
On the demand side, I think one of the biggest benefits is the cost to use, because a lot of demand users are very conscious of banks and charges. So if the cost to use is negligible or zero, then that makes it an advantage for them as well. So from the user's perspective, if it's free and it's cheap, they'll use it. Thank you.
But we don't need CBDCs for that. India with UPI and Brazil with PIX have shown we can do free transfers. And Brazil does 2 billion transfers a month. So I think the technology is good and great, but it's more policy. If they decide that these transactions
Zero
are
rate
free,
transactions, exactly.
then
we don't need CBDCs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to thank our panelists. We're at time. It's been a pleasure chatting with all of you. I also want to invite all of you to join us tomorrow when we talk about a particular use case related to humanitarian assistance. So come back tomorrow. I believe that session starts at 10.
So, Paula.
Sorry, please.
So I just wanted to say one thing before we close. I started by saying that I believe that this would be hype. But I have hope. I have hope that each one of us here in the room can do the work to make the change within us. And if we do, we can truly make a difference. But if we don't, it's just hype.
Thank you. That was beautifully said.